Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. And if you want to become a club member, go to the YouTube page, see the word join, find the membership level you like, and go from there. And for you gold members, going to be doing another private Zoom, tentatively set for 6 o'clock Friday. And, so check back then. And then also a reminder, I'm doing a live stream tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern time. So check in for that. Go to the YouTube page. You'll find the link and I'll wrap up practice for you there, but also answer some questions you might have about what we've been seeing, etc. So if you're watching on the YouTube page, you can see my guy, Bram Weinstein over here, the voice of the Commanders, and also now there's an addition to the Ampire Media page. Bram, Before we get into observations about practice, thoughts about practice, about the Commanders, tell them about that.
Yeah, I've made a shift, which I'm really happy that, for those of you who follow, I have a daily show on ESPN 630. It was 3 to 5. We've moved it to 11 to 12, which I'm really happy that they agreed to do that. The podcast version of this is now run by Ampire Media. So, same thing. We're working with John. So you'll be able to hear that right at noon. So we're going to be able to put the podcast version out immediately after the show if you can't catch it live after the exclusive airing there. And at the same time, my producer and I, Mike Callow, are going to, start taping some of it for YouTube as well. So you can see us do the show on YouTube as well. So that's going to be up on the Ampire Media YouTube page. And I think I've been wanting to do this, John, for a long time, to get streamlined into this company and be next to the show that you put together. And finally, ESPN 630 really graciously has allowed this to happen. So I'm really thankful for them to let this occur. And hopefully it's a good thing for all of our subscribers and our listeners and our viewers. And we have some more announcements to come, but that's the one for today.
There you go. And that's a good one. There's an episode up now, so go check it out. And great. I think it's great for the page. So there we go. Bram, now, obviously you're going to be talking about the Commanders there, going to be talking about here. In general, we've seen, I guess, a little more than a week of training camp at this point. Initial early takeaways from your perspective.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I kind of look across the board at the defensive personnel, and I think they might be a little better than people think it's going to be. But that said, I think it's really kind of hard to know until they really practice, and they put on pads literally once throughout this process. And even we're taping this on Tuesday. They did put in shells today. So we just haven't seen a lot. But I just kind of across the board, just a feel for the personnel. I kind of like it a little bit more. And I think the holes might not be as deep as I kind of thought they were. With the offense, I just haven't seen enough, albeit, again, today I thought was their best day in 11-on-11 stuff. They were making plays down the field. Mariota made some plays. Jayden made a couple of throws, wow throws, really engaged the crowd to a number of different receivers. McLaurin had a big catch. John Dotson had a couple of really nice ones on the sideline. Who was the guy? Tremaine. He had a couple of great ones from Mariota. They were moving the ball. They were running the ball. Eckler had a couple of those kind of patented quick cutback runs. It was nice to see. And, through all of this, I think today was a good day, a good sign that things are building. I do watch all these personnel packages kind of go in and out. And so I think we'll probably get into that. So I don't think there's anything really settled in certain spots about who plays where. But outside of that, I'm optimistic. I think it's baked in that they're going to have ups and downs because of all the changes, but I'm optimistic from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, and let's stick with the defense first, because we'll get to Jayden Daniels and what you've thought about him. Where do you think, because I agree, I don't know what people's expectations are of the defense. So they're definitely going to be better than last year. But to what level do you think they can get to, and what are some of the early things that you've seen that give you a different level of optimism after just a week?
Without knowing if they have a true number one corner and whether they have a disruptive pass rusher, it's hard for me to project them to be top 5. Could the scheme, coaching, communication, and what I think is a pretty deep potential interior defensive, up the middle, interior defensive line, linebacker, safety, I think they look strong and deep.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the field, I like what I see there. And if that kind of carries the day and they're not as vulnerable on the edges, which is where I think the weaknesses could be, then I think that they are potentially, an above average defense. But they don't have a Micah Parsons or a Chase Young Montez Sweat running around out there. I don't know that they have a number one corner. I think that's a big open question. And without those two kind of high profile, prominent positions answered, it's hard for me to know kind of what the ceiling is. But largely, I just kind of look in the middle of the field and I go, that's stout. If Johnny Newton is going to be, we haven't even seen him really do anything because of the surgery. If he's going to be an addition to that group, alongside what is the biggest upgrade to the whole thing, which is the linebacking core, with Chin, Quan, Forrest, who's fighting for playing time, all of a sudden, went from kind of being a starter to fighting for playing time. I like what I see up the middle. So all of that kind of leads me to believe. And then you have to like take at face value the pedigree and reputation and results of Quinn Witt over the years, getting turnovers, manufacturing a pass rush, and maybe taking corners who people thought were average and having big years out of them. And if all that kind of clicks very quickly, I could see where this defense is actually very good. I don't know about how high rank, like what kind of ranking we're talking about, but very good.
Well, I've been encouraged by the early start by like guys like Forbes and St. Just. And I don't know where that's going to go, but I'm not sure what my expectations were. I wasn't sure if it would just be enough with the scheme and the coaching to get them to a certain point. But I've been encouraged by the early beginning. So I think the joint practices will tell a lot. I like the safety position. I'm with you on that. I think that's going to be, to me, Bram, that's going to be one of the tougher choices when we get to the 53-man cutdown. Or to the cut down to 53. There are going to be some really tough decisions, I think, at that position.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they brought Jeremy Reeves back. Jeremy Reeves is an expert Pro Bowl special teamer. Is there a role here with Chin, Quan, Forrest? Dom Hampton was drafted. There's a couple others that are just kind of the young guys, and this happens every year. But there's a couple of them that are really standing out. Like this Tyler Owens guy's really standing out. So, and, this is all fresh eyes on everybody. I kind of like that. They've baselined the roster. They've reset the roster. They brought in a lot of people, very few promises given to most of the people that they brought in. A lot of short-term deals, a lot of not big money deals. They have their draft class and they have their free agents. And so, I think there could be some surprises. Honestly, I think there could be some surprises because we don't know. I'm not at the point now to know what they're thinking really about just about anybody. And that is one of those spots that's going to be very interesting. The linebacking core got revamped overnight. I think it's a strength of the team now. And there's going to be a couple, they got veterans now. They got veterans sitting behind Bobby Wagner and Frankie Luber. They got guys who've been around the league like Pittman and Walker. Like these guys are legitimate NFL players, specifically as backups. I mean, they got some really interesting decisions to make on defense for sure. Corner too.
Where does Jamin Davis fit in, you think?
I don't know. They're clearly exclusively working him as an edge rusher, which is a need. But is he going to be more effective than Dante Fowler? No. Cleveland Farrell? No. Obviously, Dorrance Armstrong's a starter for them. So I really don't know the answer to that. And I think, in defense of him, Logan Paulson said this to me the other day, and I've been thinking about it ever since, because he said, when was the last time you saw somebody change a position to this degree and it succeed? And it doesn't really happen, so I pushed back and I said, well, there's been a lot of corners that have become safeties, but actually largely the ones that have done really, really well at that are like Hall of Fame caliber players, like Rod Woodson, like people like that. And so I don't know. And, if you told me in a couple of weeks he's traded for a low round pick, I wouldn't be surprised. And otherwise, he's going to have to really do something on special teams to stand out, or, they may need an injury to occur to make a spot up, because it appears as if linebacker is kind of set, and it's going to be hard for him to kind of break back into that group now that he's been working where he's been working, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I'm with Logan, and I've talked about on here that it's a really hard transition to make. And just because you have size and speed and length doesn't mean you're now automatically a good pass rusher. there's a lot that these guys who excel at it that they put into it over the years. So it's really a hard thing for him to do. So
Yep.
I'm with you that, watching guys like KJ Henry, Andre Jones, even, they're ahead of him in
Right.
that area. And then you have
Right.
Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who they like enough to draft. He's got good length. I don't know if he'll make the roster, but I think he's a guy worth keeping around to develop. So I don't know where he fits in that. I think it's a worthy gamble. And to be honest, like if I'm them, like, hey, we brought in all these guys. You got, hey, we brought in Wagner, we brought in Luvu, Pittman, Walker, and then you draft, and then they go out and draft McGee. And when I say we, I'm talking like them, not me. So you really bolster that linebacker core. Does he go back and fit there, or do they kind of feel like, hey, try him here, and if it doesn't work, then maybe you can get something from another team that wants a linebacker because he can play linebacker.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he wasn't horrible. He has his strengths, he has his weaknesses. The one play, and he made a play today, Bram, and I talked about this on the podcast, but where it was a stunt, but he was able to use his speed on that, and you saw what he offers. But I think he's better as like a stand-up linebacker, maybe in a blitz situation, go get the quarterback, right? Rather than lining up on the edge, doing that. So, yeah, I think he's going to be a fascinating one to see what happens. And there may be a couple guys that they try to trade and get a couple more picks. You're not going to get a high pick, but maybe you get a couple more picks.
No.
And I don't know if they're going to do that. This is just, we're not speculating based on reporting. You're speculating based on logic and where does he fit? And will he fit? If he goes out and plays well the preseason, then you find a spot. And if not, maybe somebody else.
You just have to start doing the numbers too. Like there's another one that I think like needs to be discussed at some point. It's Jamison Crowder. Like, does he end up making the team? And it's only just based on numbers, but like how many defensive linemen do they typically keep? 9? Is it 9 or 10? It's somewhere
around 9. I
Okay.
think Quinn has typically kept 9, but like Dallas kept crazy numbers because they'd rejigger the roster within 2 days and they'd have one quarterback and 10 guys here and then they'd redo it. So, but I think it's going to be typically 9.
But like start at 9 and go, okay, John Allen, Deron Payne, I think Ridgeway, probably Johnny Newton, obviously. That puts Fedarian Mathis like in question here for this team. Like we'll have to see, but let's just say he makes it. Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Farrell, Dante Fowler, if you call him edge rush and put him into that group, that's 8, John. Like that's 8. You haven't named, you said KJ Henry, Andre Jones, who might be more established players at that position. We're out of numbers here. And I think that's why you look at it and you go, I don't know. Like, and I feel for him a little bit because the clock's ticking. He has to be able to show that he can be an impact player during a position change, and he's got 3 weeks to do it. So I think it's going to be tough.
It's very tough because then, like initially on the 53 that I did before camp, it was I included him as a linebacker, just because, like, well, it's going to be you could keep it's that was semantics, right? But you're gonna like you look at linebacker, and if you wanted to move him back there, you still have Wagner, Luvu. I don't know that you'd put Jordan McGee ahead of him, but they certainly like Jordan McGee quite a bit, and I think he can fill a role for them.
Look how much Pittman's playing, the veteran Pittman. I mean,
and
like
Walker,
right now, I'd say like that guy's going to make the team.
Yeah, exactly.
Walker might make the team.
Those guys, they remember like the key is regime change, new regime brought in all those guys. Every single guy we just named, they brought in ahead of, and so it gives them an edge. And how do they see Davis? And so I think you're right. I think it's going to be a tough one. Crowder will be interesting because so much of it depends on obviously the return skills, right? And they do like him as a leader in that room. But do they, I don't right now, I don't know, like, do you trust Kaz Allen to be a returner at this point? I think he's got to show a lot to get there. But he is a guy that could he rise up and take that job? Jahan Dotson always works back there, but we have yet to see him in a game. So until they're willing to do that, but so I think that right now Crowder's and Dax Milne works back there, but we've seen that show. We know what he can do, but he offers some of the same stuff.
This is a numbers thing too. Same thing. Just play the same game. Like, okay, they're going to, let's say 6 receivers. Okay. Cause let's say 6, cause that's a normal number here. Okay. Terry, Jahan, Luke McCaffrey is going to make the team. I think Zacchaeus is going to make the team. Like I think they brought him in. That's 4. Okay. De'Ami Brown to me is 5. Like, and he's another one that I would argue, if you didn't think that he was going to fit in for you, that he could be somebody in a couple of weeks like Jamin Davis, that you see if there's a low round pick to be had for him. But I don't see him that way. I think there's a role, right? Because he's got talent. They've already name checked him a couple of times out there. And he does have a skill set that I think is necessary here. He's a bigger target. He's got speed, pretty good hands. Like, I think he's going to make it, like, right now. Well, that's 5. I haven't named Crowder yet, like, so now he's going to have to be the primary punt returner to be the person who makes the team. And sometimes this becomes a numbers game. And those are like a couple of the prominent people that I look at and I go, until circumstances change, that's the kind of spot that they're in. It's not that I don't think he could or should make the team. I'm just being realistic. There's 53 spots. That's what's tough about this sport.
Yeah. You want tough decisions too. I mean, that's, and it's funny because when there's regime changes, you often get that, but you then in the end, you find out, well, the roster wasn't really that good. And now these guys are not getting picked up. But I do think there's some tough decisions. And I think that's one of them for sure. And again, I think a lot of it's going to depend on, does Kaz Allen showing up as a returner? We're kind of in an advanced situation with him as we were last year. Like, it's just 1 year removed. It's the same conversation as last year. Can he do enough? And are his hands reliable? Because that's where Crowder can excel for them. And they know that. And can he make the first guy miss? That's big for them too. I think Kaz Allen has that ability. But then if something happens in a game, can he play receiver? We know Crowder can. And, like with Kaz Allen, there's still, you'd like to see the consistency with the hands in that area to feel comfortable there. So I think that'll be something to watch.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, Crowder last year was a spark plug for the punt return. Like, he actually did a very nice job for them. And I agree with you. Like, in terms of right now, if I were to guess who would have to, if they were put out there to play as a receiver, who'd be more of an impact player, it's Crowder. Like, that isn't even in question. Do they think Allen is a potential difference-making returner? If they do, then I could see them going in that way. If it's all even, maybe Kaz Allen ends up on the practice squad again, and they give Crowder the opportunity to. So I could see that going either way. I think it's dire's not the word. I think it's less dire for Crowder than it is for Davis. But if you just do the numbers, it doesn't add up very well for Crowder, and he's right on the edge.
The other two to watch are Tinsley and Tremaine. And so, Tinsley's flashed with a couple catches. Tremaine is, we talked about the one today. Tinsley had a really good catch yesterday. I think, and I was watching them. I talked about this in the podcast that ran after practice Tuesday, but just watching them in some special teams drills, I think they both did a pretty good job there. And that's going to be a decider for them as well. So those are two others to watch who could sneak in there for sure. So, but yeah, so, and, we don't need to keep going into all the roster spots, but like other spots that maybe, I think running back becomes interesting. How many do they keep there?
Yeah.
I'm initially kept 4. I thought they'd keep 4, which is Robinson, Eckler, Rodriguez, and McNichols. But I don't know. I could see them keeping 3 as well, because it depends on you keep 10 offensive linemen or not. And then if you keep 10, you're keeping 1 less at either tight end or running back. And tight end is Cole Turner going to do enough to warrant a spot? I don't know.
The other thing at this point that I'm just trying to figure out, and I think because we saw this the last couple of days, was the purposeful juggling of the offensive line that was musical chairs to a degree I haven't seen in practice the last few days. So much so that Dan Quinn had to be asked twice about it. And I don't, me, I don't ask a lot of questions in the press conferences because I'd rather you guys do it, because as the voice of the team, I kind of stay away from taking that time away from you all. But it got to the point the other day where I'm like, can you just explain to me what I'm looking at? Because there were so many different players doing so many different things all in the same practice. It makes you wonder, are they all competing for all these different jobs, and who's secure outside of what appeared to be Cosmi and Biotish? And that's gotten a little more clarified over the last 24 hours, but that's the tackle spot is one to watch. And the corner spot, which has been less fluid than what the offensive line at least has shown in camp, I still think is a debate of who ends up playing more in the end, whether it's Forbes and St. Juste who are getting the bulk of the first team reps, and whether Michael Davis ends up supplanting one of those two because they trust him more. I think that'll be something to watch here.
Yeah, I want to see the corners. So like I said, I like the start they've shown but I want to see it. How does it look after the joint practices? I think with offensive line, when I was watching, is like, well, I thought this yesterday too. When you're watching, Michael Dieter is a center, but you've got to learn. You've got to be able to show you can play guard in a pinch. And Allegretti's a guard. Now, he's going to start at left guard. I haven't seen anybody who's ready to supplant him, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any question there. But
it needed to be clarified, though, because he was one of them that kept moving around.
Well, he moved around to center. He moved around to center one time. But I also think that, I've seen coaches experiment like this over the years where it's like, well, you want to see in this situation, can you go do it, right? So I took it more as that. I think where the unsettled part in becomes the tackle positions. And I also think, like Bram too, I think there's, you want to see, again, what can Dieter offer here, right? What can Ricky Stromberg offer here?
Yeah.
Like that's an edge. And I also, because sometimes, we can't ask every single question we have, but I also wonder, like, how much are you preparing? You want to get used to guys, playing with different guys, because in a game that sometimes happens. Is that part of the strategy? I don't know. And, it certainly, I think the one that raised the eyebrows to me more than anything has been tackle, right?
Yes.
More than that.
They've been really rotating him. You brought up Stromberg. I'll just say this really quickly. He's another one I would watch very closely here. I mean, this is only his second year. He's a third-round pick, but he's a third-round pick of a previous regime, and he's not the backup center. Like that's not what's happening, at least in practice. So he's not even the backup center at this point. So we'll have to see how that one materializes and see what happens there. And with tackle, I'm surprised and not surprised how quickly Brandon Coleman's getting the level of run that he's getting.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if you watch today, you would have got the sense that he is the front runner to be the starter at left tackle. And we'll have to see. Like, I think there's a relationship between Wiley and Cosme that should not be undersold here. But, if Lucas ends up being the right tackle next to Cosme, that wouldn't shock me. But I do think I'm more inclined to believe right now that it's Coleman versus Lucas for left tackle. Wiley stays at right until they tell me otherwise. But I do believe that all of this is up for debate at this point, because I don't think anything's clarified yet.
No, I agree. And, again, with Coleman, I think he's looked pretty good. Now, today, there are a couple of times where I saw him like, okay, you bent a little bit here. You got to but that happens, right? I mean, that's going to happen. So that's why I keep going back to these joint practices for some of those guys, because there's so much more to learn. And I think a lot more that you can determine from those practices that will be very, very beneficial to solidify 100%. These positions. Yeah.
And this one coming up, the first one, if there was ever, there couldn't be a more perfect team to do some judgment with. Like, we really want to know what the corners are. Rodgers throwing the ball to Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams against them. I mean, that is going to be very telling. And on the offensive line, the Jets' defensive front is one of the best in football. So we're going to see a lot. Like, we are going to see a lot next week. The Dolphins, similarly, like, I want to see those corners have to do whatever drills they do with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Let's see it. And Tua, because they're going to get a real test, because you're not going to get it in the preseason game. So we're going to get to know that. That front of the Jets, I think, is going to tell us a lot about who's where with this offensive line, honestly.
Good point. And I think that's a great point. Because I can sit here and say I like what I've seen from Coleman, but we're not watching him against an elite pass rusher at this point. Right. So I think you want to see not just him, because you need that cohesion up front, and you need the, five working as one, right? And that's how an offensive line is. So it's not always going to be just about Brandon Coleman's always locked up. You can do things, you can play call can help, scheme can help, but at some point you got to just block. So I think we'll get a good feel for those guys, just like I remember way back in, was it 15, where Brandon Sheriff starts off at tackle, the Texans come to town, Brandon Sheriff gets shifted to guard a couple of days later. So, that's where it's helpful to see all that. And that, I think that's why with Coleman, that position, but you're right. Like, it seems like Coleman has taken a few more reps at that spot ahead of Lucas, and again, you're trying to see what can Lucas do over here, and et cetera. So what about for Jayden Daniels? And I think we haven't even gotten to him hardly at this point, but early thoughts on him.
I feel the same way that I felt in the spring. Like he looks pretty good. I still haven't seen him, like again, the training wheels have to come off. They got to put a uniform on, put a helmet on and go full speed. And until they actually do that, like it's really hard to really judge it. But there are just a few moments in these practices where he's thrown a few of these passes where you go, just inject that. Like he's going to do some of these things in the games. It's going to, all the promise that we've talked about, it's visible in these certain moments. He's very smooth. He escapes a pocket. Again, he's not going to be tackled, and he knows that, but he escapes the pocket. It's very smooth. He had a couple of tight window throws to like Dotson on the sideline. He had one where he just back foot flicked one off of pressure that like hit McLaurin in stride 30 something yards down the field. This was one of those where I went, you do that in the game, you're heading to the Pro Bowl. Like those are the moments. And so I'm seeing them and it's great. And honestly, like, although Mariota had a really, decent, good day. In general, like with him, and this is why I think like in the end, Jayden's going to be the starter whenever that happens. There's just a few too many. And I saw this in, getting prepared to play, watch the team play against him for many years, let alone, throughout his career. There's just too many plays where there's these inaccurate moments that just downs get blown up with inaccuracy. And you see it in practice with him. With Daniels, you actually don't see that as much. Like the ball didn't hit the ground all that often. It may not be completely exactly on target, but you could see the makings of it. It's just kind of building. So I would just, I feel the same way about in the spring. I'm very hopeful. All the signs are very good. Everything everybody's saying about him is really good. He seems like a really nice, humble kid. And, let's see, call me in a month on that one. Like I need to see him play somebody.
Oh, we'll talk about him after the Jets game. Don't worry about that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, but you're right. Like, and he's shown nothing to suggest anything that I shouldn't feel the same way. I don't know if that's even a good sentence and grammatically correct or whatever. In other words, I agree with you.
You and I are careful. Like we don't want to we're not hot take jump to conclusions people. But I will say he's looked good. And in the same way I would have told you in Sam Howell's rookie year, he didn't,
right. He didn't.
Yeah.
And I will say, like in talking to the coaches, there are times that even they'll say, yeah, on some plays, there's a completion and we look at it and say, oh, he completed this pass. They look at it and say, that was the wrong read, or your footwork is a little bit off. And so they're going to look at the details because the details will clearly, we know that he's going to be starting at some point, whether it's in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. But the details of that position will determine how well he plays when he gets in there. So you want to make sure you focus on that before you get there. And that's what they're doing. So, but that's the part we don't know. Having said that, he looks really good. And the stuff that I've been impressed most by, Bram, is, he has really good touch on his ball. And there are times where he feels like on this one, I've got to zip it in. But he's got multiple pitches. So he's throwing fastballs here, a changeup here, a little bit, just a little soft touch over there, right? So I think I like that part of him. He doesn't always feel like he's got to throw a 90-mile-an-hour fastball on every throw, because there were some quarterbacks in this draft, that's what they did. But I like that he has good touch with it. I think that comes from the poise in the pocket and some of those plays that you talked about earlier. That was an example of that. And that's one of the things I like. It's like the attributes that I feel like you need to build a good quarterback, I think he possesses. Now you just have to go do it.
Yeah, you have to go see it. And like when I watch him in practice, I like his decision-making. It seems like it's really ahead of the curve. Obviously athletically he's gifted, like that's why he was drafted where he was drafted. And that's all really great. But in the end, it will come down to what are his instincts in the game. And you just don't know what they are until we get there. What are his instincts in the game? And I always when I hear people say like, oh, he's going to have to protect himself. Yeah. Good luck with that in the NFL. Like he's going to have to figure out how to do so and take a beating at the same time. And instinctually, how is he going to make the play in light of all of it? Like Pat Mahomes is who he is because his instincts are maybe the best I've ever seen. And so let's see what happens when he gets out there. That's why I'm just so cautious to say anything other than I think it's off to a good start.
Yeah.
I'm hearing the right things. I'm seeing the right things. I know what kind of athlete he is. I know what kind of promise he brings. But until he plays, none of us know. None of them. The coaches don't know either. And I think that's why they're slow rolling this too. They don't want to put too much pressure on him because he is a rookie. It will take some time. And let's just not thrust him into the world and say, you're the savior.
I think the entire organization has taken that tack because they've gone out of their way not to over promote him. Yep. With at FedEx after the draft, he did not go over there for a reason. When you look at some of the promotional material, he's not the guy featured. They're looking at the vets. Now he has, I think on the entrance going into the facility, he's one of, half dozen, 10 players whose pictures are there, which he should have one, but he's not the prominent one they're featuring. I think they're trying to really reduce that for him. Just learn the playbook, go play. Everything else will happen organically if you do well. And you know who knows that? He does, because he's not that's one of the things I like about him. He understands his role is and what it is. And he talks so much to the veterans that I think they have a healthy respect for him. And shoot, I also thought it was telling. I don't know, if you heard what Jahan said, Willie, after practice today, talking about how he and Terry McClellan were on the sidelines talking about basically he calls him a special talent, but how he can just do things with the ball that others they feel can't, and put the ball in places that others can't. And when you have receivers talking like that, those guys know. You didn't hear. There were guys like Sam Howell. He was a 5th round pick, right? He's just a different talent level, but you weren't hearing this stuff. They liked him. They hoped you could get there. And not to knock on Sam, I like Sam, but
so do I.
But as a quarterback too. But point is, I haven't heard them talk about a guy like this in a long time.
Yeah, this is a different player. With a different athletic ceiling that can do different things. And, but I agree. I've already seen the glimpses of it, especially today. The one he threw to McLaurin was outrageous. These are the moments if and when they happen in games that you start talking about him like a special talent to make throws like the one he did today. Just effortless, backing up, protection wasn't there. Drops one in the bucket to McLaurin, 35 yards down the field. Those are the ones where I go, I see why he's the number 2 overall pick and why hopefully he's going to be an answer at a position that we haven't had an answer to in a long time.
There you go. Let's end on that one, Bram. Reminder, the Bram Weinstein Show on the Ampire YouTube page, or on the Ampire Media page. Check it out. Every day. What time? Noon every day?
It airs on ESPN 6:30 still from 11 to noon. And then right at noon, the podcast is up. So subscribe to that show. I got to do what you do. Subscribe to the show. And then most days, my producer and I, Mike Callow, are going to do tapings of it. And we'll put it up on YouTube as well. So most of the days, it will double up like your show does on YouTube as a video. Check it out. Subscribe. Check it out. Please, all your comments are welcome. Please, please, please.
Well, most of them are welcome.
No, they're all welcome.
Mike Callow to makeup. I like that. So there you go. All right, Bram. And I agree. All comments are welcome, even the ones who kind of go crazy sometimes. All good. All good. Let's end on that one. Bram, thanks a lot. And for folks listening, thank you for tuning in. I'll be back on what's today? Wednesday. I'll be back on Thursday, wrapping up with our practice. Actually, that's the live stream show, 2:00 Eastern time. Friday will be another one after practice. So I'll talk to you next time.